Hello everyone, welcome to this session on British literature from Chaucer to 18th century. In this session, I'll be dealing with Module 1, Poetry. In this session, we'll be dealing with a brief overview of 14th century and a few poems, that is Chaucer's The General Prologue, William Shakespeare's Sonnet 18, Donne's The Canonization, Milton's Paradise Lost Book 1, Dryden's Macflegno, Andrew Marvell's To His Coy Mistress, Thomas Gray's Elegy Written in a Country Churchyard. And as you all know, it's not possible to give a detailed analysis of all these works in this short lecture. So we'll be going through all these works in a very short way or in a very brief way. So let's get into all these works. Now, before getting into these works, it's very important for you all to know or you all to have a very brief idea about various periods of English literature. Okay, so let's see what are the various periods of English literature in short. Now, the first one is the Old English period, that is from 450 to 1066, and it's also known as Anglo-Saxon period. Now, during this period, literature comes from the invasion of Celtic England by Germanic tribes at the earliest part of the 5th century through to England's subjection under William the Conqueror in 1066. And I'm sure that you all might be knowing about various works during this period. And there were lots of works, and the works were from oral tradition, and that paved the way for 8th century literature in Anglo-Saxon argot, that is secret language. And you know that there are some famous works under this where no authorship is given. One of the important works of this period is Beowulf. Okay, and then comes the Middle English period, which is from 1066 to 1500. Now, you can divide Middle English period into three: the Anglo-Norman period from 1066 to 1340, the Age of Chaucer from 1340 to 1400, the Dark or Barren period from 1400 to 1485 or 1500. Now, the Middle Ages consist of literature produced in the 4 and 1/2 centuries between Norman invasion of 1066 till about 1500. And here, the common language of literature was born of London, and this language was recognized as modern English towards the end of 15th century. Now, the writings of the first half of the 14th century were mainly of religious beliefs and observances. And in the later half, what you find is that great secular literature was seen. And then comes during the age of Chaucer or during the 14th century, you can find the master work, the Canterbury Tales by Chaucer, and some anonymous works or alliterative poems like Sir Gawain and the Green Knight during this period. Okay, and with the ascension of the House of Tudor to the England throne or English throne in 1485, the Renaissance era is commenced. Okay, until then, what was the situation was it was a dark or barren period from 1400 to 1485. Now, the Renaissance period was from 1500 to 1660, and it was also known as preparation for Renaissance, especially from 1500 to 1558. And during Renaissance period, the Renaissance period began with humanist writers like Sir Thomas More, and he was also credited to writing the first sonnets in, very important work. And also there were some writers like Sir Thomas Wyatt, who was credited to writing the first sonnets in English. And again, this Renaissance period is again categorized into 4 ages like the Elizabethan, the Jacobean, the Caroline, and Puritan interregnum. Okay, the Elizabethan age in English literature occurs with the reign of Elizabeth I, during which medieval tradition is merged with the creative ingenuity of the Renaissance, and this period was also known as the Golden Age of English literature. And you can find an unexampled wealth of literary art during this time, and especially in the fields of prose and lyric poetry. And this age had a brilliant contribution by various writers, various poets like Edmund Spenser, Sir Walter Raleigh, and the illustrious immortal William Shakespeare. Now, when we're talking about the second half of the 16th century, which is the Jacobean period from 1603 to 1625, when King James I was reigning. And during this time, literature was the theme of the literature were more sophisticated. Aside from its most notable contribution, the King James the first had a version of the Holy Bible. The Jacobean age in literature produced many volumes rich with socially conscious dramatic prose. And this is the era of such literary luminaries as Francis Bacon, Thomas Middleton, and John Donne. And Elizabethan ages like Shakespeare and Ben Jonson, the then famous dramatist, continued to produce works throughout all these ages as well. Now, then comes the Caroline age, that is Caroline period from 1625 to 1649. The Caroline age in literature coincides with the sovereign Charles I, okay, because he was ruling then, and is marked by works of lordly refinement and elegance. And this period is known best for its cavalier poets, a romance-filled yet witty circle of bards, that means poets, whose poetry embodied the culture of pre-Commonwealth upper-class England. And the circle's leading scribes were Robert Herrick, Richard Lovelace, Sir John Suckling, and Thomas Carew. And then uh, is the main contribution, that is Puritan period began actually from 1620 to 1660, but its interregnum continued to the Commonwealth period as such. So the Puritan interregnum or Commonwealth period of English literature includes the works of the time of Puritan. Like I told, like I said, it was a period of strict orderly life, and theaters were closed down during Puritan period. Actually, during 1640s. So no drama were written during those time, and the leader was Oliver Cromwell during those time. And from this period came the prose of Andrew Marvell, that is works of Andrew Marvell, then political works by John Milton, and many political treatises like Leviathan penned by Thomas Hobbes, etc. All these works came during this time, and during this time the England was ruled by monarch and mainly Oliver Cromwell. Then comes the Neoclassical period, or the Age of Reason. Otherwise, it's known as Age of Reason. And here, English literature was highly influenced by the French literature of its age, and it mainly adhered to the decorous language and form, which was mainly derived from classical works. And also, they mainly expressed an emphasis of impersonal or universal truths, especially in a satirical form. And John Dryden was one of the very famous writers of the Restoration period. And the Neoclassical period marks the first great age of English literary criticism also. And similar to the English Renaissance, the Neoclassical period can also be divided into subsets like the Restoration, the Augustan, and the Age of Sensibility. So Neoclassical period is actually divided into three. That is the Restoration period, where John Dryden dominated the Restoration period, especially from 1660 to 1700. And the Augustan period was dominated by Alexander Pope, and that was from 1700 to 1745. And the Age of Sensibility This period was dominated by Dr. Samuel Johnson. It was from 1745 to 1785 or 98. Okay, so the restoration was as to reflect the restoration of the monarchy and social morale for the unjust rigidity of the previous religious and political works of both the Commonwealth and the Protectorate. The Restoration era proved a breakthrough in enlightenment, and that resulted in the revival of drama, which was shut down during the period of Puritan age. During Puritan age, it was shut down, and that revival of drama took place during this time. And the reopening of the theatres, like I said earlier, it was closed during 1640s or 1642. And this period produced some of the world's most wittiest and licentious poetry and prose, and some other works like Comedy of Manners, that is some kind of drama which was funny, and that was known as Restoration comedy. Now, major authors of the Restoration period includes many, like John Dryden, John Locke, Earl of Rochester, etc. And from the Restoration period emerged the publication of the majestic satanic epic, that is Paradise Lost by John Milton. And then the Augustan age takes its name from the literary period of Horace, Ovid, all these classical writers, or Virgil, under the rule of Roman Emperor Augustus during those time. And in England, in English literature, the Augustan age, that is 1700 to 1745, refers to a literature with prevailing characteristics of gentility or elegance or similarity or imitation or adaptation of all these uh, classical works. And the better known authors here include the satirist Jonathan Swift, the popular Samuel Richardson, the author of the novel, the novelist. He is the author of the work Pamela or Virtue Rewarded, and the highly regarded and most esteemed Alexander Pope, the only poet of the spirit. And then comes the age and sensibility, or the age of Johnson, named after the period's leading literary scholar and critic. Samuel Johnson places emphasis on the importance of sensibility or emotional sentiments. He had empathy for the medieval ages, and he had an interest in medieval ballads and folk literature, forming a transition between the rationality of the age of reason or neoclassical period with the emotional responsiveness of the romantic period. So this is all about the various period of um, English literature. This is a very short overview. You have to refer to the books related to the history of English literature to know more about the period of English literature. All right, now let's get into the work one by one. Now, before discussing the general prologue, let me give you a very short overview of the age of Chaucer, which is otherwise known as 14th century. Now, age of Chaucer is otherwise known as the opening moment of English literature. Though we talked about Old English period and Middle English period, age of Chaucer is otherwise known as the opening moment of English literature. Now, let's see why it is known as the opening moment of English literature. Now, Chaucer's lifetime in English history is actually very funny or very interesting, because he is the only person who lived under three monarchs. And it said that Geoffrey Chaucer, born in 1340 during the reign of Edward III, and the succession of Richard II was in 1377, and it was at this time he witnessed the Revolution of 1399, the deposition of Richard II, the foundation of Lancastrian dynasty. All these he happened to witness, and that was during his lifetime. And Edward III was succeeded by Richard II in 1377. And Chaucer died in 1400, the year after the accession of Henry IV. So, in this way, we say that Chaucer is the person who lived under three monarchs, that is Edward III, Richard II, and Henry IV. And this is a very interesting quality of Chaucer himself. Now, let's see a few details about Geoffrey Chaucer. As you all know, he lived from 1340 to 1400. He belongs to the Middle English period, and he is known as the morning star of the Renaissance. And you all know that John Wycliffe is known as the morning star of Reformation, and Geoffrey Chaucer is known as the morning star of the Renaissance. And this is a right name given to him. He was born in London into a wealthy family, and very little is known about his childhood. And it's said that he is son of a merchant, wine merchant. Okay, and he enjoyed the advantages of a liberal education because he made vast contacts at a very young age, and that has made a remarkable contribution in his life. Like at the age of 17, he was appointed in the court. He was a page to the wife of the Duke of Clarence, that is Edward III's son. Okay, and in 1359, with the English army in France, he was taken prisoner, but soon he was ransomed for 16 pounds. Later, he got married, but no much information is known about his domestic life. And valet of King's Chamber, then he became valet of King's Chamber later, and he continues to be closely connected with the court, and he were sent on various diplomatic missions during those times to France, Italy, etc. He was sent as ambassador to different parts of the world, and rightfully he was the appropriate person to begin English literature, and that's why we often say that Chaucer is the right person because he has seen so much during his lifetime. Now, what are the various ups and downs in Chaucer's life? Now, two diplomatic visits, he had conducted two diplomatic visits to Italy, and it was influenced by the Italian culture and early Renaissance. And maybe it was during this time he might have met Petrarch and Boccaccio. That is how these historians believed. And he was the recipient of many royal favors, and it said that he even sat in the parliament as Knight of the Shire of Kent. Okay, and he had to face the main crisis which he had to face was that Lancastrians were overthrown during this time. And during this time, Chaucer's patron was John of Gaunt. He was banished from court, and thus he almost fell into poverty. And thus, lots and lots of uh, events happened in his life, and these turn of events changed his life altogether. And then comes the accession of the King Henry IV, John of Gaunt's son. He provided grant of a royal pension for Chaucer, and that helped him to look forward for a better life. And then after that, within a year, in 1400, uh, Geoffrey Chaucer dies, and he is the first poet to be buried in Westminster Abbey, and the now it is known as Poets' Corner. It's a very important point to be noted, and historians prefer to call this age as Chaucer's England because of all these events that happened in his life. Now let's see Chaucer's England. Now, Chaucer's England emerged as a distinct nation because of native influences, and you can also see standardization of English during this time because East Midland dialect was considered as the standard English during those time. And then it said that clergy spoke Latin during those time, and courtiers were talking French during those time. That is, language of royalty was Latin and French, but the common people were talking Old English or East Midland dialect. So this, because of this, he decided to standardize English, and that in East Midland dialect was the standardized language or English language during those time. And then this period was dominated by Roman Catholic Christianity. As a part of Reformation, revival of spiritual Christianity in England was also taking place, and clergy also enjoyed lots of power during this time. Then another important event which was prominent in Chaucer's England was expansion of trade and land as well. Then you can also see renewed study of the literature of classical antiquity because of the influence of Italy and Renaissance. Then influence of humanism. There is emergence of Renaissance and secularism also can be seen during this time. Emergence of Oxford as an intellectual center. Wycliffe's contribute influence is there in shaping Oxford as an intellectual center, and Cambridge's prominence was seen by 15th and 16th century. And also you can see that foundations of the English college system was also seen, and there are various reasons for all these things, and the reflection of refinement and exposure was also taking place. So in short, we can say that Chaucer lived in an eventful period. Now, why it is known as eventful period? Now, it's called as eventful period because so much happened during those time. Now, one important thing is plague. Plague, you all are familiar with Black Death. It wiped out one third of the population during those time. It occurred 4 times then on. Okay, we'll discuss about this in the coming part. Then rebellions like peasants' revolt were happening there. Corruptions were there. That is, a Roman Catholic Church was the breeding ground of corruption during this time. And then there were lots and lots of war were taking place in the form of 100 Years' War between England and France, which almost continued to 116 years. Common people also lived bearing the brunt of all these things. And heavy taxation was also taking place during this time because he doubled due to the effect of war, and then again anarchy was also there. So in short, common people had to bear the brunt of all these events. Now let's see what is 100 years of war. Now, 100 years of war, as we discussed, is between England and France, and it was from 1337 to 1453, and that is almost 116 years. Okay, and heavy taxation was one of the reason, and because of this war, resources were drained, and French loses its prominence due to hostility. And during this time, reign of Edward III was from 1327, and two provinces were left under the control of France, which was under England, left in France under England. That is, two provinces in France were under England. And then what happens is that in England, in France, in 1328, King Charles IV dies, and he was left with no heir. So what happened is Edward III became the King of England, and French people were unhappy because of this. And at this point, 100 Years' War breaks out. And initially, the victory was on the side of English, and later it flips and French wins. Okay, so ultimate victory was was gained by the French, and this led to the appearance of Joan of Arc. And Joan of Arc is a very famous work written by George Bernard Shaw. You all know that, and it was based on these events. Since then, the English resented French supremacy, leading to the decline of feudalism and the nationalistic interest in England as a literary language. And the war, which had brought prosperity to various classes in England because of the rich booty and high wages of soldiers, suffered a severe check from the Black Death. So this is the main contribution of 100 Years' War. So it's very, very important to know about 100 Years of War because its influence can be seen on 14th century. And now, why this period is known as challenging period? Now, the general mood of 14th century was not favorable for common people. That's why it can be considered as a challenging period. And you know that these are the various reasons for that. Uh, Black Death is one of the reasons because you know that Black Death appeared or occurred um, due to um, a deadly infectious bubonic plague. A deadly form of the highly infectious bubonic plague, which carried out across Europe by black rats. Okay, and because of the insanitary conditions, um, towns were affected more than villages, and poor died everywhere like flies. Probably one third of the population were washed off due to this plague, and this repeated reappeared thrice after 1384 to 49. Again, it appeared in 1362, then in 1367, and then in 1370. Okay, so and this occasionally break out until the late 17th century, and until medical science improved, and the black rat was driven out by the brown rat, which did not carry the disease. And this led to social chaos, labor shortages, peasants' revolt, and introduction of the wage system. So this is a very important event to be noted. That is Black Death. Then peasants' rebellion, which was from in 1381. It's an uprising of peasants, and this is also the aftermath of or the end result of Black Death and the resultant economic and political insecurities. Now, the immediate reason for this peasants' revolt was that King Richard II, who was aged 14 then, he was a youngest king, he attempted to collect a poll tax or head tax. Okay, and because of this, violence broke out throughout the country. Peasants sought to end the unpaid serfdom. Serfdom, you know, that's slavery. And it was led by Wat Taylor, Watyler, Wat Taylor, and John Ball, Johnball. So Wat Taylor and John Ball carried out this revolt. Taylor was beheaded and the revolt was put down. And about this revolt, you can see that this is described in John Gower's, that is the contemporary of Chaucer. In John Gower's Vox Clamantis, in that work, you can see the details of this revolt. And this was completed sometimes after the revolt. Now, Edward III and Richard II was deposed and murdered in the 14th century. Then Magna Carta, that is Magna Carta, you know that it is the privilege guaranteed to every free man, and this was not possessed by most of the people, and this was there in the reign of during the reign of King John. Okay, so this was what happening during those time. And then, as I said in the beginning, corruption of the church. um, Church were accumulating immense wealth, and there were lots and lots of scandals in the monasteries. And the 100 Years' War with France drained the resources of the nation, as we discussed earlier. Famine, death, anarchy, tyranny, war, heavy taxation, etc. All these led to the situation which was not favorable for common people, and thus it is known as challenging period. Now, there are three major influences that shaped Chaucer's age. One is social and political unrest, which we discussed right now, and then a reformation on the religious side, and then Renaissance. So, these are the three reasons or three influences that helped shape Chaucer's age. Now, let's talk about Chaucer's writing. Now, Chaucer's writing can be divided into three periods. One is the first period is known as French period, the second one is Italian, and the third one is English. Now, under the French period, I mean, some of the important works written by him was Troilus and Cressida, House of Fame, Parliament of Fowls. And Canterbury Tales was written during the third period, that is English period, and it is his magnum opus or the masterpiece work written by him. Popularization of English as opposed to French, Italian, or Latin was taking place with the publication or with the work Canterbury Tales. And he was not a poet of the people, but he was a court poet. No reflection of the age, religions, or social movements can be seen in him. He was removed from reality of the time. He was court poet, so he often wrote from the perspective of a court poet. Okay, and the first full expression of the English sense of humor was seen in his works. Okay, and his writing, and thus his writing is very significant, and it is cynical and kindly humor. The kind of humor you find in Chaucer's work is cynical and kindly as such. And also you can see influence of Italian humanism heavily on his work. Free and secular spirit is also seen in his writings. Though he was removed from ground realities, all these influenced his, but all that was happening in England influenced his writing. He often belonged to courtly class, and hence you could find those ambience in his writings. Now let's see something about Canterbury Tales. Now, Canterbury Tales, as you all know, is an unfinished collection of 24 comic and moral stories told by a group of pilgrims. Okay, and this took place when they were having a journey or a pilgrimage to the shrine of Thomas Becket at Canterbury. And Chaucer presented it as a storytelling contest. Um, there were prizes, a free meal at Tabard Inn in Southwark. It was the contest was organized in such a way that each one has to say two stories on the way to the Canterbury and two stories way back. So this is how the whole um, Canterbury Tales was structured. That is a story within a story. That's how it was structured. Now, when you're going through Canterbury Tales, you get a snapshot of the age. That is what is 14th century as such. That is, if you're reading Canterbury Tales, you get a glimpse of 14th century as such. And it is also known as the portrait gallery of the 14th century. Okay, that is a sense of medieval life through a range of characters. That is how through the portraits and the story of each pilgrims you understand what exactly was 14th century. And this is a most elaborate and extensive way of the portrayal. And you find the old feudal order, that is knight, squire, yeoman, plowman represent the old feudal order. Merchant, man of law, guildsman, cook, they represent the merchant class. Then prioress, monk, friar, pardoner, all these represent the ecclesiastical class, that is the church. And the whole work was structured in such a way that it was entertaining and open to a range of interpretations. Moreover, this work could be considered as a literary tour because you find romances, that is various genres in this work. Romances, for example, the story or the story of Wife of Bath's Tale is could be considered as a romances. Then you have Fabliaux, Fabliaux. Miller's Tale is considered as a fablo, and the stories of saints' lives, sermons, that is considered as the Parson's Tales could be considered as the story of saints' lives and sermons. And then there are allegories in the form of Pardoner's Tale. So, in short, when you're observing it in detail, you find various, it has a literary tour that is taking place in this whole work. So, this work was published in 1478 under Caxton's printing press. And in short, this is a wonderful treat for any literature student. And um, this is a very important work which all of you have to study. Now, 14th century could be considered as an age of transition in many ways, especially during 14th century. There was the rise of the middle class, and these are represented by the five guildsmen that is portrayed in the prologue. And you also find birth of nationalism, feudal to free society, that is the transition taking place. Feudal system is replaced by free society. Then humanism in the form of spirit of inquiry, critical attitude, new learning, that is you can see enthusiasm for new learning. And also expansion of English literature, that is English literature that is this has become a fertile ground for new languages and literature, and many happy history accident of history is also taking place during this time. And some other important poets of Chaucer's age are John Gower, William Langland, John Wycliffe, John Mandeville, and John Barber. All these are the contemporaries of Chaucer. So I'm not going into the detail of all these authors. Okay, so this is a short overview of the 14th century. So this 14th century is an eventful period. Now, when you're looking at the prose in Chaucer's age, you have very little to record of the Chaucer, prose works, including Chaucer's own writing. Then Wycliffe's Bible is an important contribution. It had huge influence in the 14th century, and his followers are known as Lollards. Okay, he provided translation from Latin to English, and those works were revolutionary. And he brought a Bible closer to common people, and hence he had to face a lot in his life. Then Wycliffe's pamphlet, it was also controversial, showed the power of vernacular over Latin for theological discussion. Until then, common people were not provided with Bible, and they were not knowing what was happening in the church. So it was Wycliffe who brought Bible closer to the common people. Then the Travels of Sir John Mandeville, written by John Mandeville. It is a work which contested authorship and could be a compilation of stories translated from French, and it is the first English prose classic. And this work was hugely popular during the period. And then we can also say that Middle English period after Chaucer, that is after 1400, was mostly barren in terms of literary output. And actually, this period could be considered as a significant period, as a preparatory period for the golden period of literature, that is Elizabethan age. That's how we can consider um, the last half of the Middle English, last part of the Middle English period, which is after Chaucer. Now let's go through Chaucer's general prologue in a very short way. We have to go through only the first 100 lines. Now you all know that there are certain when you're reading the prologue to the Canterbury Tales, you come across three historical events which accelerated the change, like we discussed earlier. One is the Hundred Years' War, the second one is the Black Death, and the third one is Peasants' Revolt. You can see the influence of all these works in the general prologue. Now, how cultural background is significant. Now, as we discussed earlier, Chaucer divides society into three conventional estates. This is very important when you're studying the general prologue. The knight, uh, he represents nobility, the working man, the third estate, and the ecclesiastic, that is the church. So these three estates of the society, conventional estate of the or the strata of the society, is discussed in the general prologue, but he leaves out two extreme strata or the estates. What are they? He never talks about aristocracy, and he never talks about serfdom in his general prologue. He only talks about three sections of the society: the knight, which represents nobility, the working man, the third estate, and the ecclesiastic, the church. And it shows he observes society mainly through the eyes of the rising middle class. So that is the reason. And when he leaves out the two extremes of aristocracy and serfdom, it suggests a deliberate choice of a bourgeois perspective, because as we discussed earlier, he was a court poet and he observes society mainly through the eyes of the rising middle classes. And marriages were negotiated with great haste on purely commercial motive during those time, and that was the reason for many child marriages during those time. And another interesting thing is that a woman could inherit property, but in order to defend it, she need a husband. So if a woman is inheriting property, if she had to defend her property, she has to have a husband. Divorce was easy only for the rich people who were scheming for large inheritance. And the idealized woman of courtly love was put on a pedestal to be worshipped by the knight contrasts violently with the widespread practice of beauty wives, sisters, and daughters. So actually, everything was just opposite of what was happening in the society. And perhaps the idealization was the natural outcome of the unbearable harshness of actuality. So he was trying to idealize all those concepts through these works. And there being little privacy in the medieval castle, women being debarred from the masculine recreations of physical exercises, drinking, and what. Women were not allowed to do exercises, or they were not allowed to drink, or they were not allowed to contest war. They were always confined to an intolerable boredom, or they were always confined to the four walls of their house. So all these were not that was the reality of the society. But in Chaucer's work you find the exact opposite of what was happening in the work. The wife of Bath is a great example for that. She is a woman with lots and lots of liberty and doing everything according to her instinct. That cannot be seen in the actual 14th century society. So that is the cultural background. Now, coming to the intellectual background, the intellectual milieu of Chaucer was ultimately controlled by a religious vision common to medieval culture. Nobility and courtly love acquire a deep spiritual content. Christian church played a central role in the life of the people, and parish priest, even more than the passing friar, was the chief instructor. So, parish priest was the chief instructor. The Lollards dominated the literature of satire and complaint. So, Lollard was a group under John Wycliffe. Then the Lollards are remembered for the first English translation of the Bible under the guidance of Wycliffe. And the cosmos of the Middle Ages were provincially ordered and harmonious. In the Middle Ages, it was believed that um, that is whole world was held together by God's love, which controlled all the cycles of seasons, tides, birth, and death. Everything was under the control of God. Now, according to medieval belief, the stars as agent of destiny combined with fortune as powerful influence on human life. Astrology and medicine was also closely related in Chaucer's world, and it said that each of the 12 signs of the zodiac, zodiac sign like Aries, Scorpion, Capricorn, Virgo, etc., etc. So all these are known as zodiac signs. And it said that these 12 signs was thought to control different part of the human body, and the physical characteristics and nature of each person was determined by his horoscope at birth. So this gave rise to the four medieval humors. You must be familiar with humor, especially Johnson, who talked about comedy of humors. He talked about four humors. Now, what is this four humor? Now, four humors, I will talk about that in the next slide. The four humors are very important in determining one's character. And then he, this is also related to astrology, which was the pseudoscience of alchemy. Okay, so astrology was also given importance during those time. And the four humors worked like this. If blood, that is, the four humors are blood, phlegm, choler, black bile. Now, if blood predominates one's body, he is a sanguine person. Sanguine person means optimistic or confident person. And if phlegm predominates, he is a phlegmatic person, which means he's a cold, dull, indifferent, or sluggish person. And if choler predominates, he is a choleric person, that is a hot tempered person. If black bile predominates, he is a melancholic person, he is a depressed or a sad person. So, Chaucer's in Chaucer's characterization, the Reeve is a choleric person and Franklin is a melancholic person. So these four humors were very important during the age of Chaucer. And another medieval science in which Chaucer had interest was the science of dreams. It's also very interesting. There are five ways of discussing it. The somnium. Somnium means dream requiring symbolic interpretation by expert. That is by symbols. Suppose there were a belief that when you see a snake in your dreams, that is you are having enemies, or if you see an elephant, it is some kind of dangerous or something like that. So the some dream requiring symbolic interpretation by an expert, that is known as somnium. The visio, that is coining even exactly as it will be. That is, if you dream something, it might happen actually, and that is called the visio. Then oraculum, a spirit or a relative or an important person appears to the dreamer and announces what is to happen, and that is called oracle. Oracles, you can see oracles in classic works. Then insomnium. Insomnium indicate nothing apart from the dreamer's physical state, and that produced by fear or worry or digestive disturbance, and that is called insomnium. And the phantasma is indicate nothing apart from the dreamer's physical state. It's a kind of delusion. So these are various kinds of uh, signs of dreams, and this is how they interpreted dreams. Then comes literary background. Uh, Middle Age began in England with the Norman Conquest, as you all know, and it ends with the Reformation. So, in terms of literary output, we can divide it into three periods. Now, the first period that I'm talking about, the Middle Age. Okay, the first period up to 1250 is religious writing. That is, religious writing predominated during those time. And in the second period, romances predominated. And in the third period, main works were by Chaucer, William Langland, Gower, and Pearl Poet, and so on. So many works were there in the third period. Now, before the Norman conquest, Latin was the language of divine worship and learning. Okay, English, that was Old English, was widely used in other spheres. The Normans introduced French language into England as the language of the ruling class. But the English language continued to be spoken by the uncultivated masses or common people. The oral nature of English kept it alive among the largely illiterate people. And so, above all, what we can say is that the language survived as the popular medium of preaching. Okay, now the fertility and variety of literature around Chaucer's time could be like romances, lyric, drama, mystical meditation, and also a literative revival of the 14th century were taking place in the case of literature. Now, when you're talking about the art, as in literature, you can see various changes in architecture as well. England gradually tried to work out on a native version of the complex and glorious Gothic style of buildings were seen. Gothic was the characteristic mode of Middle Ages, and one of the most important buildings of the 13th century was Henry III's Westminster Abbey. And by the second half of the 14th century, perpendicular style began to dominate. It was spread over England as it was cheap and less extravagant. Okay, and the Hundred Years' War introduced French brickwork and French type of castle built in a simple quadrangular plan. So this is the way how art was predominating during the 14th century. Okay, now let's get into the work, the Canterbury Tales. It was published in 1387. Canterbury Tales was based on Boccaccio's Decameron. The General Prologue is also known as Portrait Gallery of the 14th century England. In this, though he had planned to write 120 stories, he could only complete some 24 stories. So here you find that 29 pilgrims meet at Tabard in Southwark, and 31 were there, including poet and Harry Bailey, the host of the inn. And you can see pen pictures of 21 pilgrims, then 23 pilgrims tell stories. In short, you find 24 stories in there. Two stories were told by Chaucer, and those stories are Tale of Sir Thopas and Tale of Melibus Prose. And the prologue to Canterbury Tales begins with Knight's Tale and ends with Parsons' prose treatise. The Canterbury Tales ends with the retraction, that is Chaucer's apology, in making fun of the various strata of the society or the people, because he wrote it in a humorous and in a satirical way. So for that he ends the Canterbury Tale with a retraction. So this is how he structured the Canterbury Tales. Now let's see the general prologue or the opening of the general prologue to the Canterbury Tales. I'm not going to talk about the lines, I'm just giving you a very short overview of this work. So, this prologue begins with a memorable description of spring. Um, it was a time where the shortage of fresh food was there, and it resulted in diseases like scurvy in winter. And so, what was happening was many people were falling ill. The sweet showers revive nature and, by implication, human nature. So, the underlying motive is of resurrection or spiritual renewal. So, that's why spring was very important during 14th century. And this is the way in which the cycle of season is closely related to the cycle of human life. So, cycle of season and cycle of human life was closely related during 14th century. And the pilgrims usually come from all corners of England to visit the shrine of St. Thomas Becket, who was martyred in the Canterbury Cathedral in 1170. It's very important. So, and about this event, you can see T.S. Eliot describing about this event in his Murder in the Cathedral, in his play Murder in the Cathedral. And Eliot's Wasteland is also opens with an ironic echo of Chaucer. Uh, in in Chaucer's prologue to Canterbury Tale, he opens with the line, "April is the sweetest month." But T.S. Eliot contrasts, and he gives an ironic statement of Chaucer's um, view of the April. And according to Eliot, it is April is the cruelest month. Now, so that is a very important line to be noted. And the sign of the inn where Chaucer, the narrator, is joined by the 29 pilgrims was a tabard or short sleeveless coat embroidered with armoral bearing. The fellowship of pilgrims suggests a sense of community, and their varied backgrounds make the description a miniature version of 14th century society. So, in the opening of this scene itself, you find that people from various parts of the England are gathering there, and they are from different walks of life and coming from different backgrounds. So that disparity makes them what to say, a community formed out of diverse culture. So that's the peculiarity of the Tabard Inn, where pilgrims are gathered, and thus we can say that it is a miniature version of 14th century society. Now, so in the beginning, in the opening, he talks about spring, and spring is in the month of April. And this is how he says, when the sweet showers of April have pierced the dry soil of March down to the root, what happens when the west wind is Zephyrus, has inspired flowers to grow everywhere. So it's a positive way or a pleasant weather. When the constellation Aries, the ram associated with spring, appears in the sky and birds sing. At this time, people choose to go on pilgrimages to other countries. So many in England visit the shrine of Saint Thomas at Canterbury as they want to make offering since many were falling ill because of scurvy. Okay, and then the narrator is introduced. In the spring, he says, one day, so he's talking about the incident when all these people, he met all these 29 other pilgrims. In spring, one day, the narrator stayed at Tabard Inn, Southwark, on his way to Canterbury. Now, what happened? A diverse group of 29 pilgrims arrived there. There were enough rooms and stables at the inn for them all. Now, what is the name of the inn? Tabard Inn. And where was it? In Southwark. Now, the narrator, who is the narrator? Chaucer himself. He spoke to all of them. And they made plans to get up early next day and go on their journey together. And then after that, what happens is the narrator is proceeding to tell us about the pilgrim. So this is how the prologue to the Canterbury Tale begins. And the first character that the narrator was explaining to us or introducing to us was the knight. Now he says, there was a knight, a worthy knight, who was a chivalrous and from the beginning of his adventure loved truth, honor, freedom, and courtesy. It said that he fought many wars for his lord in Christendom, that is Europe, as well as heathen countries, that is Asian countries, and was honored everywhere for his bravery. So he was such a brave person, such a true person, an adventurous person who was honored for his bravery everywhere. And then the narrator recalls the knight's victories in various places like Alexandria, Prussia, Lithuania, Russia, siege of Algeciras in Grenada, Spain, Belmir, Ayas in Armenia, Atalia or Antalya in Turkey. Mostly all these battles were against the Moors, that is pagans. And then again, the narrator is describing about the knight's character. It said that he fought 15 battles in the Mediterranean region to preserve Christian faith, and he never lost once. That is one thing. Then he fought with the Lord Palit against the heathen king of Turkey. That is another important battle. Though he won sovereign prizes and was noble, he was wise and as meek as a maid. So this is how he is being described. He was wise and as meek as a maid. He was so noble and he was such a wonderful person. In his life, he never said bad things at others and was truly a perfect gentle knight. Okay, this is how he's being explained. Then the narrator talks about the knight's clothes. He talks about the knight's clothes in a conversational style. He was having a horse, and that horse was of fine quality, but he did not wear any gaudy clothes or a pompous clothes. He wore a thick, hard-wearing cotton shirt. Okay, he wore um, and this was discolored by his armor, that is haber gown, and he is still wearing his armor because he has just returned from his voyage and he is now going on this pilgrimage, and that is he is coming straight after his voyage and his battle, and he's straight away joining these pilgrims, and that's why his clothes are shabby and he is in his um, usual war dress. Then the next character introduced is the square. The square is chivalrous, his son. So the square is the son of the knight. He was a lover and lusty bachelor, a gentle, happy young man. He was about 20 years old and had curly hair that looks as if it had been pressed. So he gives so much importance for his appearance. And he was of average height. He was wonderfully an active man and he is of great strength. And he has served in the cavalry or horseman army in Flanders, Artois, and Picardy and did well there also. And with his exploits, the squire hoped to win his lady love. And the square, when you're observing the square, he's youthful. He wore a colorful shirt, especially he wore an embroidered dress that looked like a meadow of white and red fresh flowers. He always sang or played the flute and was as fresh as the month of May. That is how month of May, M is capital. He is often called as he is as fresh as the month of May. Okay, and he wore a short gown with long and wide sleeves and rode his horse well. Okay, he could make songs, joust, dance, sketch, and write. So hot he loved that he slept not more than a nightingale does. And he was courteous, humble, and willing to serve, and carved before his father at the table. So that is carved before his father at the uh, table means he was a person who served his father at the table. Not fable, it is table, and it indicates that the square is becoming as good as his father. So this is all about the two important characters. So for you, you have to look at the openings of the general prologue, then the narrator, then the two important characters, the knight and the square. Now, apart from these pilgrims, there are some other pilgrims depicted or portrayed in the pilgrim in the prologue. They are yeoman, prioress, monk, friar, merchant, clerk of Oxford, sergeant of the law, franklin, five guildsmen. Five guildsmen are can be divided like this: haberdasher, carpenter, weaver, dyer, and tapestry maker. Then there is a cook, shipman, doctor of physic, wife of bath, parson, plowman, miller, manciple, reeve, summoner, pardoner, host. Host name is Harry Bailey. You have to note the name of the host, and the narrator Chaucer himself. So these are the other pilgrims apart from those whom I discussed. Okay, so with that, we come to the end of Chaucer and his general prologue. Now, let's have a look at Shakespeare's sonnet 18. Now, before getting into the sonnet, I would like to give you a very brief overview of Age of Shakespeare, that is from 1558 to 1625. Now, like I said in the beginning, Age of Shakespeare is divided into two: Elizabethan period, Jacobean period. Now, this period was the age of rapid development in English commerce, maritime power, and nationalism. Age of Shakespeare is also known as Age of Renaissance, and also this was the golden period of English literature. And you know that Renaissance has been described as the birth of the modern world out of the ashes of the dark ages towards the end of 15th century. Now, this was the age of learning. It was the revival of knowledge of Greek language also. Now, during this time, the reign was of Queen Elizabeth I from 1558 to 1603. England emerged as the leading naval and commercial power of Europe during her reign, and her defeat of the Spanish Armada was also also took place in 1588, and spirit of nationalism was on the rise. Protestant church was also firmly established. Then Sir Francis Drake, Sir Humphrey Gilbert, and Sir Walter Raleigh pioneered the eastern navigations and colonial trade during the age of Shakespeare. Now, talking about Queen Elizabeth I, she was the last Tudor monarch. She reigned for 44 years, became a cult figure of this period. She represented the glory of England and was able to defeat all the plots against her successfully. There was a great military victory over the Spaniards in 1588 under her, and this led England to be one of the most powerful countries in the world. And she was famed for being a virgin towards till her last, and she was the epitome of beauty and greatness, moderate, tolerant, diplomatic, and also her popularity waned towards the end of her rule. Now let's have a look at London in the Elizabethan age. London was the center of culture and commerce beside the Thames River. Growing population was on the rise. Growing population and dominant merchant class were some of the important events that was happening during this time in London. And immigrants from other towns were also settling down there. A large number of poets and dramatists were also on the rise. Drama was the most popular entertainment during Elizabethan age. And London was becoming noisy, dirty, and a narrow street because of too much population. So that is the importance of London in Elizabethan age. Renaissance, Reformation, printing press, all these began to take a very positive impact in British life during Elizabethan age. Now, in addition to this, discovery of new worlds, explorers, curiosity, adventures, extensive use of compass, map, all these were taking place in uh, England during this time. And also, this enlarged the boundaries of mines, expansion of trade, accumulation of wealth were also taking place as a result of all these. And geographical and intellectual expansion was also happening. Prosperity and internal peace was also established. Elizabeth's court was more secular, more tolerant, and religious. Modernization was also practiced by Queen Elizabeth in that sense. England was a safe haven for Protestants because of all this. The political influence and personal fortunes of clergy were decreasing gradually. Church also started to lose its power, and mainly clergy lost all the positions it had until then. A cosmopolitan sense of mind, daring to question because of Reformation, and a sense of all self awareness, that is, as a part of Renaissance, were seen. Now, let us see some of the very basic characteristics of this age. Now, by virtue of its wonderful fertility and of the variety and splendor of its production, this period ranks as one of the greatest in historical records of the world's literature, and that's why this period is known as Golden Age of English Literature. And the spirit of Shakespeare's age is described as an age in which men lived intensely, thought intensely, and wrote intensely. I repeat, the spirit of Shakespeare's age is described as an age in which men lived intensely, thought intensely, and wrote intensely. This is a clear indication that literature was coming up to the forefront in various forms during this period. Art and literature can only grow in an atmosphere of peace, order, and prosperity. So, in order to uh, in order to grow grow or prosper, art and literature should be in an atmosphere of peace, order, and prosperity. And thus, Elizabethan age assured all these three requisites, and hence, this is the golden age of literature. Now, some other poets apart from William Shakespeare are Edmund Spenser, Thomas Sackville, Sir Philip Sidney, Michael Drayton, Samuel Daniel, etc. I'm not going into the details of these poets. Let's get into Shakespeare. Now, William Shakespeare um, lived from 1564 to 1616. Now, always there is a question, who is William Shakespeare? Now, this doubt exists of his authorship because there are certain stories that Shakespeare is not an actual person. He is the other version of university, which such stories are there, but still we get an impression that but from all the details available, we are believing that William Shakespeare is the real person, and um, he has, I mean, he had lived during those time and he had made a contribution. That's the belief we have. But there is no actual records of his birth and early childhood. That's why we assume that he was born on 23rd April 1564 in Stratford upon Avon, based on church records. Other than that, there are no actual records of his birth and early childhood. Now, then talking about his family, he was the son of an older man, one of 8 children, and he said to have hailed from a well-to-do family. Now, he had a sound education, but he was not a very learned person. He never went to university. So, about his education, that is, he had a sound education, but he is not a very learned person, because it said that he was decent in those days, and he went to grammar school, studied Latin and arithmetic from there. And this is how Ben Jonson talks about him: small Latin and less Greek. That is, he looked upon by other learned people for of his time like this. That is, um, Shakespeare was not a learned person who never went to university, and that's why Ben Jonson talked about him as, I quote, small Latin and less Greek, unquote. Now, in 1577, because of financial misfortunes, um, I, he had a very horrible life because of financial misfortunes, but the circumstances are not at all clear, because we don't have any evidence about what was the reasons of his financial misfortunes. Then it said that in 1585 he married Annie Hathaway, who was 8 years senior to him, from the baptism record of for a daughter and a set of twins. One of them dies. So this is the record, and he was the father of 3 young children before he was 21 years. And this is a strange record we have about him. And in 1587, it said that he left for London, and from there he started writing. So his journey of several days to London had taught him a lot. And in 1592, he started writing and acting in London, and became an established writer at the age of 28. And that is important enough to merit abuse from Robert Greene, because he wrote unkindly about his new fellow, and thus he had to face a lot from there, because he started to write important enough to merit abuse from Robert Greene, because according to them, since he did not go to university, according to Robert Greene, William Shakespeare was not so great, though he became an established writer. If you have watched the movie Shakespeare in Love, you can understand all these situations which happened in Shakespeare's life. In 1594, he appears with William Kemp and Richard Burbage as one of the leading actors. During Elizabethan period, many of them used to flock to watch their favorite actors. So thus in 1594 he became one of the leading actors also. And in 1597, he authored 15 of the 37 plays. That is considered as a tremendous achievement on the part of Shakespeare. Okay, and when we are looking at his career, he was an actor, he was a playwright, he was a theatre owner, he was an entrepreneur, he was successful, and he was catered to be marketed. Then he was a practical man of affairs, no dreamer like Chaucer. That's how Hudson talked about him in the text, that is History of English Literature. And like we said, he was a theatre owner. He was the shareholder of the theatre, the Globe, and the Black Friars. So that is an important contribution, because producing a couple of plays a year earned him fame and wealth. England owes much of its cultural heritage to Shakespeare, and his literary outputs were prolific than his contemporaries, and thus his contemporaries envied him, and that's why he those people tried to put him down in whatever way possible. And he also is said to be purchased property in Stratford in London as a part of real estate dealing. And there were some domestic sorrows that happened in his life due to the death of his son in 1596, father in 1601, younger brother in 1607, and mother in 1607. And in short, we can say that his life was not a bed of roses. A lot of tragedies were hitting him now and then, one after the other, and he had a major impact, and that had a major impact on his career and his personal life in general. And it's said that he produced his masterpiece piece when he was in turmoil. Okay, and in 1610 to 1612, he it said that he purchased the largest house in Stratford, and mysteriously about his death, it is a mystery. It said that he died on 23rd April 1616, and according to the burial record, it was on 24th 5th April. So his death is also mysterious. So this is a very short overview of William Shakespeare. You have to refer more to know more about him. And then why we are talking about Shakespeare's genius. Uh, the most important thing is that he is not the learning of the trained and accurate scholar. He is like we say, he's a self-made person. Wide miscellaneous knowledge of many things. He had a wide miscellaneous knowledge of many things. He did not stick on to one thing. He had knowledge of many things, and he all these he gathered from different sources, and he was influenced by the classicism of the Renaissance. Translations were also used by him. He had access to ancient literature, especially Greek, Roman literature, and the influence of all those can be seen in his plays. He was charged and stimulating intellectual atmosphere in Elizabethan England. So he charged and stimulated intellectual atmosphere in Elizabethan England. He was trying to keep himself abreast of the latest happening of his time. So that much genius he was, and he had contributed uh, a lot of words to English language as such. Okay, and you know about the first folio, the first collection um, of his work, and that is known as the first folio. It was published in 1623. Okay, and some of his works are, I'm not going to name the works, I'm just talking about the collection of works. He has written two narrative poems, 154 sonnets, 37 plays, and in short, we can say that the whole works could be connected as great single body of works. It is incomplete ones and collaborated works. Like that, there are greatest single body of works also written by him. So, in short, two narrative poems, 154 sonnets, 37 plays, and altogether we can say that it's incomplete ones, collaborator works, etc. Thus, we have a greatest single body of works published by him in the form of first folio and so on. Now, let's talk about sonnets. Now, what is a sonnet? Sonnet, as you all know, originally is a stanza used by the Sicilian school of court poets in the 13th century. Sicilyan, Sicilian school of court poets in the 13th century. Now, this reached its highest expression in the poetry of Petrarch. You might be knowing Petrarch, okay, and he wrote 314 sonnets idealizing his beloved Laura, Laura. So, this is how sonnets originated. So, sonnet is originally a stanza used by the Sicilian school of court poets in the 13th century, and this reached highest expression in the poetry of Petrarch, an Italian poet. Okay, and in the case of England, in England it was Henry Howard, that is Earl of Surrey, and Sir Thomas Wyatt who experimented with the sonnet form and gave it the structure that Shakespeare used. So, who promoted sonnet in England before Shakespeare? It was Henry Howard, the Earl of Surrey, and Sir Thomas Wyatt, who experimented with the sonnet form and gave it the structure that Shakespeare used and made famous. Since then, the sonnet has proved itself to be one of the most versatile of the poetic forms. So, thus, it became one of the most versatile of the various poetic forms. And in recent years, some years back, you might have seen an Indian writer, Vikram Seth, wrote his novel The Golden Gate in the form of sonnet. So many writers are experimenting with it. Okay, so what is a sonnet? Sonnet is a poem which consists of 14 lines in the iambic pentameter form. Okay, sonnets, most of the sonnets fall into three categories. One is Petrarchan sonnet, the other one is Shakespearean sonnet, and then you have Spenserian sonnet. Now, what is Petrarchan sonnet? Petrarchan sonnets are of two parts, that is, first part will be of 8 lines and the second part is of 6 lines, and they call it as octave and sestet, S-E-S-T-E-T, sestet respectively. So Petrarchan sonnets, though it is of 14 lines, it is divided into two parts, um, an octave which is of 8 lines and a sestet which is of 6 lines. And originally the sonneteers set forth a problem in octave and they resolve it in the sestet. For example, Wordsworth and Keats wrote Petrarchan sonnets, and Petrarchan sonnets follow the rhyme scheme A B B A B B A in octave. Okay, in the 8 lines they follow the rhyme scheme A B B A, and in the sestet 2 or 3 rhymes may be employed as the situation required, like C D C C D C or C D E C D E. So this is how the Petrarchan sonnet is written. Now, coming to the Shakespearean sonnet, it's divided into 3 quatrains. One quatrain means it consists of 4 lines. Like that, 3 quatrains, and to be followed by a rhyming couplet. That is 2 lines. So 3 quatrains and followed by a rhyming couplet. So all the problems will be discussed in the 3 quatrains and the solution will be given by the rhyming couplet. And the rhyming scheme is A B C D C D E F G G. So what is the rhyme scheme? It is A B C D C D E F G G. So this is the way Shakespearean sonnets is written. And again, coming to Spenserian sonnet, it's also divided into 3 quatrains and a rhyming couplet. Now, few rhymes in a Spenserian sonnet than in the Shakespearean sonnet. So, in Spenserian sonnets, every Spenserian sonnet does not rhyme. And also the rhyme scheme of Spenserian sonnet is A B B C C D E E. A B C C D E E. So the rhyme scheme of the Shakespearean sonnet and Spenserian sonnet differ. So you must make a note of it. Okay, so this is what sonnet is all about. Now let's get back to Shakespearean sonnet. Now, like we said, Shakespeare wrote 154 sonnet, and it said that this was first published by Thomas Thorpe, okay, in quarto form. Please note this. This was published by Thomas Thorpe in quarto form, and the first 126 sonnets is addressed to some Mr. W.H. Okay, and that is this W.H. could be Henry Wriothesley, Earl of Southampton, or William Herbert, that is Earl of Pembroke. It could be either Earl of Southampton or Earl of Pembroke, that is Henry Wriothesley or William Herbert. So this is not known. Okay, so these sonnets were first published by Thomas Thorpe in quarto form in 1609. Okay, so the first 126 sonnets is addressed to some Mr. W.H. And in this sonnet, he tries, in these 126 sonnets, he tried to depict a kind of spiritual love. And in the next 26 sonnet, which was addressed to a dark lady, it could be Mary Fitton or Emilia Lanier or Lucy Morgan. We don't know who actually is the dark lady. So in that, he depicted overtly erotic and physical love. And the last two sonnets are about Cupid. Okay, so this is how he divided his 154 sonnets. Now, coming to the themes discussed by him in the sonnets, most of the themes discussed by him, one is love, a source of great joy as well as great worry for the speaker. Then he talked about broken trust of friendship. Um, that is, the young man and the dark lady fall in love with each other. It's like that he talked about the broken trust of friendship, and then the loss of love is another theme discussed by him. That is a young man's rejection of the poet and the dark lady's multiple sexual partners. So that's how that is a kind of deceitful relationship. Then forgiveness. He also talks about forgiveness. And another character, that is a rival poet, probably George Chapman. He also wrote sonnet about him. Then sonnet sequences in the 16th century were not confessional narratives. You must note this, because in the 16th century, sonnets were not written in the confessional mode. Now you can see anti-Petrarchan elements in the sonnets written by Shakespeare. That is, the sonnets depart from Petrarchan conventions in the following ways, like they subvert conventional gender roles, then not idealized but a complex and troubled view of love. Okay, then makes fun of love, beauty, and Petrarchan conventions. That is how he wrote, and he speaks on themes other than love. So this is how we find anti-Petrarchan elements in Shakespeare's sonnet. And then when you're talking about the style, it's like we discussed earlier, three quatrains and a couplet, and rhyme scheme is A B A B C D C D E F E F G G G. So this is how he talked about his sonnets. Now let's get to the sonnet number 18. I'm not going to read the lines of this sonnet because um, this is a very short overview. Now, sonnet number 18 is otherwise known as Shall I Compare Thee to a Summer's Day? So this is the name of sonnet number 18. Now, this is one of the best known of Shakespeare's sonnet. It is a memorable for the skillful and varied presentation of subject matter, and in which the poet's feelings reach a level of rupture unseen in the previous sonnets. So you find a level of rupture or a breakaway in this sonnet. And here the poet abandons his quest for the youth to have a child and instead glories in the youth's beauty. So he glorifies the youth's beauty rather than the quest for the youth to have a child. So this is how he began this poem. Now, initially, the poet poses a question, and what is the question? Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? And then he reflects on it, remarking that the youth's beauty far surpasses summer's delight. So, the youth's beauty is far more than summer's delights, and he uses imagery in the very essence of simplicity, especially the imagery of wind and buds are used here. And in the fourth line, he uses legal terminology, that is summer's lease, and that is also introduced in contrast to the commonplace imagery in the first three lines. And he also the poet uses extremes in the phrases like more lovely, all too short, too hot. So these phrases emphasizes the young man's beauty. So here he is reflecting on the way he is thinking about the youth's beauty. And again in line 9 through the 12, he talks about it in an expansive tone and with more deeper feeling. The poet returns to the simplicity of the opening images. Now, we all expect in Shakespeare's sonnets the proposition that the poet sets up in the first 8 lines. This is like we said, first he states various reasons and then he comes to the conclusion. So, we all expect like that, that all nature is subject to imperfection. And then he now contrasted all these in the next 4 lines, beginning with but. So, whatever he talked about in the first 8 lines, he started to contrast it in the next 4 lines with beginning all the lines with the word but. Although beauty naturally declines at some point, okay, and every fair sometimes decline. This is how he talks about beauty. The youth's beauty will not. His unchanging appearance is atypical of nature's steady progression. Even death is impotent against the youth's beauty. So that's how he talks about. So we find an ambiguity in the phrase eternal lines. All these are ambiguous. Okay, we all know that beauty declines as we grow age. And now the question is, are these lines the poet's verses or the youth's hoped for children? Or are they simply wrinkles meant to represent the process of aging? Now, whatever the poet is trying to raise in the lines from 19 through 12, that is the line from 9 to 12, though he raises several questions, but whatever the answer is, here in this poem, the poet has written it so brilliantly that nothing threatens the young man's beautiful appearance. So, that is the peculiarity of this sonnet. And then follows the concluding couplet. Now, this is how the couplet is. So long as men can breathe or eyes can see, so long lives this, and this gives life to thee. So, through these couplet, the poet is describing not what the youth is, but what he will be ages hence, that is, ages afterward, as captured in the poet's eternal poem, or again in a hoped for child. So, whatever one may feel about the sentiment expressed in the sonnet, and especially in these last 2 lines, one cannot help but notice an abrupt change in the poet's own estimate of his poetic writing. So, in short, we can say that it comes as a surprise in this sonnet to find him boasting that his poetry will be eternal. So, that is the peculiarity of Shall I Compare Thee to a Summer's Day? Okay, so in short, we can say that this is one of the most famous of all the sonnets written by Shakespeare. The summer's day is found to be lacking in many respects, and here the poet holds that the young man is like the summer's day at its best without any flaws. The poet tries to immortalize the young man through his own poetry, and the poet attempts to preserve the young man's beauty for all time or eternally. So, with that, we come to the end of sonnet number 18. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Okay, so this is the short overview of this poem. You have to read in detail before